everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
Jeff, we've known each other a long time.
Yes, longer than yeah, longer than longer than I care to remember. Longer than
Well,
I care to admit.
and and I consider you a friend.
Well, thank you. I consider that a compliment. I consider you a friend as well.
Thank you. Now, there are different types of friendships,
So
and
there are.
that's one of the things we're going to talk about. But what we're really the question I asked and wanted to talk about is whether respect is necessary and trust are necessary for friendship. So we have
Well,
to
and
define trust
yes,
and respect and friendship, and that leads into tonight's discussion.
right. And is it also, in fact, we are going to talk about Aristotle's three types of friendship.
Yes, we
Um,
are.
but I don't. But one of those in that category, one of those three categories has to be drinking friends. And that leads me to ask you, what are you drinking?
Well, tonight I have, again, I've had this before. This is a spicy penicillin made with Lieber and Company makes different types of syrups, and I'm using their fiery ginger syrup.
Oh,
Um, so it's their fiery ginger. It's a riff on a traditional penicillin. So it's their fiery ginger syrup, lemon juice, honey syrup, and Scotch whiskey.
Scotch whiskey. Okay.
Yes. So there are, not a whole lot of Scotch-based cocktails.
Right.
Um, but it's got a nice kick to it, very citrusy. I quite like it.
Well, good.
And how about you?
I've also got something I've had before. It's the um, Breakfast of Degenerates whiskey from our friend at Indiana Whiskey Distillery, which is a bourbon whiskey aged in maple syrup barrels.
Okay.
So it's got a little hint of maple, mostly in the aroma. Um, but then I have paired it with a, a maple. It's smoked maple bitters from Ironfish Distillery here in Michigan,
Hmm.
and with my usual Fever Tree ginger beer. So it's got that little ginger spice
Nice. Good.
also.
Yeah,
So
nice. Well, here's to friendship.
friends.
Um,
Hmm.
so
So
yeah,
so we've talked about friendship before, what it means, what it amounts to, how does one enter it, how does one maintain it. Um,
we had an episode about the friendship deficit.
mhm.
Discussed that. We also discussed the the trust versus performance matrix.
Yes,
And that's based on a professional setting. And the argument presented that we were talking about was that organizations, people work in organizations, and the example is the Navy SEALs, prefer somebody of high trust and okay
right, right,
competency. You can, because they can improve, to somebody who is high, low trust and high competency because they're toxic.
right.
So So we talked about that and the friendship deficit. So yes. Excuse me.
And friendships can turn out to be that kind of relationship too, where you when a relationship suddenly turns untrustworthy,
Yes.
it's extremely toxic. It's that betrayal, if you will.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
that's what it feels like when it turns out you have a friend that you can no longer trust, or that you have trusted and found out that you couldn't all along.
Yeah, and I think we have both. I think anybody who's gotten to lived any
Yeah,
sort of life for any length of time has experienced that.
yeah,
Um, somebody you trusted who turned out to be untrustworthy, somebody you considered a friend who you simply can't be anymore,
right.
can't be their friends anymore. But that does ask the question, what is friendship? And which, as things often do, we go back to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
The
Socrates,
classics.
the classic, the foundational philosophers. Aristotle, who, I mean, Socrates, um, never wrote anything down, but his student Plato did. And what we know is the Socratic method is derived
Hmm.
from those writings of Plato, who was, or Socrates was executed
Yeah,
for teaching his beliefs, his teachings, which were about questioning things, and so the authorities uh, ordered him executed, and which actually led to his ideas being further disseminated. Plato was his student, and then Aristotle was a student of Plato. And Aristotle wrote about three types of friendship.
yes,
The friendship of utility based on what you can do for each other. And this is often work relationships are begin as friendships of utility. That is, you are friendly, cordial, courteous with
right,
people you work with, and you are all working towards a common goal and you do things for each other, but it's based on utility. You don't necessarily go out to lunch, go have a drink, hang
right,
out, any of that sort of thing. Um,
right. They're not part of your, they don't become part of your social circle.
exactly. But they can be. You might,
Yes.
with people, go out and have a drink. I always, when I worked in agencies, one of the things I always wanted to do was identify the non-asshole account executive, um, who was okay to go out and have drinks with because they had an expense account and they would often put it in
Ah.
their expense account. So it was utility,
Okay.
but
Yeah, somewhat mercenary, in fact, on your
somewhat,
part.
but yes, but became started moving into friendship of pleasure, maybe, which is based on enjoyment of a shared activity. Could be, going out for drinks, going out for dinner. It could be like a social organization, like the medieval reenactment organization,
Hmm.
where it's a shared activity, sometimes shared misery when you're
Right,
putting on
right.
armor and sweating and getting hit with sticks. Um,
It could
but
be something like a sports fan type relationship where you go
yes,
to games together,
yes,
or you see each other because your seats are nearby each other at a
right,
game, and so you know them within that context.
right. Um, even I'd even say neighborhoods can
You,
can
certainly now,
be
yeah.
that. Um, but I think it's interesting. Neighbors used to be closer friends sometimes be, because than they are now because people are more mobile, people move. Um, but they can certainly develop into that. People's closest friends often don't live right next to them.
Right.
And those close friends are described as friends of virtue, friendship of virtue, people you like for themselves, you like to associate with, who influence you positively, and
Yes.
you hopefully influence them positively as well. Um, a relationship of self-sufficient equals, and is often less fleeting, less transitory, more stable than the other categories. People change jobs, friendships of utility
Hmm.
can change. People go in and out of hobbies or, you know, that can change. Um, so friendships of virtue. I do think, he didn't write about this, but friendships of virtue, because they are based on relationship of two self-sufficient equals and is stable, those can become the basis for a long-term romantic relationship.
Yes.
My as ours started, um, and I think that's often forms the basis of a very long-lasting and stable and profound marriage.
Yeah. And there's another, I found this other quote that mirrors this a little bit, and it's a friends for a reason, friends for a season, and friends for life.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Is a nice mnemonic sort of way to sum these things up.
that's
Um,
nice.
and I agree with you that uh, one type of friendship can and often does, I would submit, morph into another.
Hmm.
And I think that can go that you can sort of promote someone to a level, and you can also demote someone. And I
Yes,
think we have both experienced that where, especially in a when we belong to a large organization that has wide, far-flung people, that you can become really close to them, and then something happens, or maybe nothing happens. You just gradually find that the association with them isn't as convenient, and they drop back into from what might have been considered uh, a friend of virtue, a friend of character, may may now occupy that second tier of,
right,
now they become a friend of pleasure. You remember the good times. You don't have anything against them, and you can still enjoy their company. They're just not the person you call up at midnight because your car broke down.
right. I think there's as far as dropping down or dropping out or changing, I think it should be noted that it takes it takes work, it takes effort, it takes communication, it takes consistency to maintain a relationship, a friendship at any of those levels. Um, so if you have certainly a friendship of virtue, that highest level, and somebody simply stops responding when you, or they leave the effort of contacting entirely up to you, and
Yeah.
they never reach out, it changes things. If and if the second one, the relationship of pleasure, a friendship of pleasure, going out for drinks or having a hobby, you're not included in that, or they shift to another, well, that changes things. So
Hmm.
it does take, relationships take equal work to maintain an equal relationship. It can't all
Right.
be on one side. Um,
Well, then it's not a relationship, right? It's
right. So I mentioned respect. Is it is respect necessary to have a friendship at any of those levels? So we have to describe respect, or define respect. Um, what does it take to respect somebody?
well, yeah. I mean, there's an integrity component, certainly,
Hmm.
that when someone says something, someone makes a promise, someone um, offers assistance, whatever, that you can count on that
We can trust
to be
on,
true. Yeah, trust to an extent where
right.
we have talked before about the two beers and a puppy test. Um, and I think that those are trust levels
Yes.
in many ways. Like, would you trust someone, or would you go out with someone? You might have a beer, and you might have a beer with a friendship of utility, right? It's kind of
Mhm.
the one
Yeah.
beer level. Two beers is you enjoy their company. So two beers, you can sit in a neutral environment, and you can have a certain amount of conversation, and your senses of humor mesh to an extent where you can have an enjoyable interaction with somebody for a few hours.
Sure.
And then there's the, would you trust them to take care of would you trust them in a room alone with your child for 2 hours, or would you trust them with your puppy for a weekend?
Yeah.
That's what you have to really work hard to get that level of trust with
Yeah.
somebody.
Yeah.
So, and I think that correlates pretty well to these three levels of friendship.
Yes. I like the summary you said. Friend for
A
a
reason,
reason, friend for a
friend for a
season, friend
season,
for life.
friend for life.
I think respect. I think the different levels of friendship require different levels of respect. So you can respect somebody's abilities, a
Sure.
friendship of utility. You can respect their abilities. There are people I've worked with who, yeah, they good at what they do. Um, and um, I do remember there's something in the Covey Seven Habits of Successful
Successful
People,
people. Yeah.
which was a required training. It was very popular at a certain time. There's some good stuff in there. I always thought it was amusing that he seemed to copyright or trademark every other word.
Yeah.
But one thing he said was he made a distinction between effectiveness and efficiency. So
Mm.
efficiency is getting things done. Effectiveness is getting things done in a way that brings everybody along and leaves everybody feeling better and is more likely in a business sense to get repeat business. So there's certainly clients, for example, who would say, you did great work, but I never want to work with you again because the process was so horrible.
Yeah.
And other clients who would say, okay, there were a couple of mistakes, but next time on the next one we work together, we'll fix those. It'll be great.
Hmm.
And that's what you want. And so there are people you can trust to do a good job. You can respect their ability to do a good job, but you don't necessarily respect the way they do it. So respect is not just a blanket thing. It's nuanced.
True.
It's compartmentalized. Um, I think I mentioned this before at an agency I was at. An account executive came to me, he wanted to talk about a project. And I said, well, this project, these accounts are usually handled by this other art director. He said, I know, but when I go to them, the first 20 minutes is spent listening to them complain about how difficult their life is and how much work they have to do and how awful things are before we can get down to business. With you, I come talk to you and you say, how can I help? Let's get started. And so I'd much rather work with you. And so I think that's the difference. It was the quality of the experience, respecting the process,
Right.
not just the result. Um, so the
Well, there's
different
also there's all
kinds of respect.
if I may,
Yeah.
the difference between efficiency and effectiveness, as you're talking about, I think also is that efficiency, as you point out, gets things done,
Mhm.
but doing something effectively is more likely that that method or that technique or whatever it is becomes adopted by the culture,
Yes.
right? Because it's shown to be it, you didn't just get through it as quickly as possible. You built a infrastructure around it, and it works. and it can work for everybody. It's not your particular genius that makes it work,
Right.
right? Which an efficient person can do, right? Someone who is a real genius can occasionally walk in. There's lots of TV shows based around that sort of individual who is absolutely a perfect expert at the thing they do, and nobody likes them.
Yes. But they use them.
But they use them, and they can't abandon them because of their utility.
Right.
I mean, like House is a perfect
House.
example, or Monk is another example. Although, if anybody remembers Monk,
Yeah, and
but
they people felt sorry for him. And
well, he had an endearing sort of quality
he
to him. He
did.
was vulnerable as well as annoying. But,
Yes. Both great performances, by the way.
oh yeah,
Tony Shalhoub as Monk and um House
Hugh Laurie.
Hugh Laurie. Yeah. Who really funny if you ever saw Jeeves and Wooster.
Oh yeah, or
Wow.
a bit of Fry and Laurie.
Yeah.
They're
He was yeah, he was in a when he was in college, he was in a comedy troupe with um actress uh Princess of France in Henry V. Um
uh, I know who you're talking about. Oh
yes,
no,
yes.
wait, no, I'm thinking of Braveheart. No, sorry.
No, no. I'll figure it out.
Okay,
Before the end of the episode, I'll figure it out.
okay.
Um
So, so respect then,
yes,
like we were saying, we digressed a little bit, but so respect has to do with your willingness to trust someone within a very narrow scope of their ability, right? I
yes.
think that's
Yep.
fair
Yep.
enough.
Yep.
So there's a certain amount of trust, but it is really confined to this tiny square of what you are doing and what is expected of you, right?
Emma
Within these
Thompson.
parameters, you're
Emma
trusted.
Thompson.
Emma
Emma
Thompson. Oh,
Thompson.
all
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Never mind. Okay.
So
Yes.
so within these narrow parameters, you are trusted to do this single thing, and you are respected for being able to do that one thing extremely well.
Yes. I think one of the problems comes when, and this has been true for a long time, um, um, that someone who excels in one area suddenly gains a level of public respect where people and they
They
want to know what shirt you wear. Wasn't that
yeah.
from
The papers want to know what shirt you wear from Major Tom.
Major? Yes. Um, so like Charles Lindbergh flew for a
Yep.
solo flight across the Atlantic, and then suddenly he was considered a hero, and people wanted to know everything about him and his opinions were valued, despite the fact that he was fascist,
He was an anti-Semitic racist
anti-Semitic,
shithead.
racist shit. Yeah, yeah, and there actually been at least one um, alternate history novel where he was elected president of the United States. Um, so, um, which would have
Wow.
been horrible.
A dystopian novel about electing a racist authoritarian
Yeah,
shithead.
yeah, exactly. No, it'll never happen, right?
Not in this country.
Yeah. Um, so respect for somebody's abilities, but that doesn't and shouldn't transfer to respect, unearned respect for other things, their intellect or their, or their
This
knowledge about other things that they aren't knowledgeable about.
this touches on my whole rejection of celebrity culture. This that is
Yes.
it in a nutshell. That
Yep.
yeah, you can do a thing.
Yep.
So what?
Well,
Congratulations.
I respect, I mean, there are people I respect for doing a thing really well. Um,
Right. But I don't need to know the details of their life. I don't care what they're wearing this week.
right. I mean,
I don't
there are people as a consequence of writing my writing my last book. Always cracks me up to say that. Um, I met a lot of people, very successful people in a number of different fields, including entertainment, and I who are very accomplished, and I respect their accomplishments. Anyone who can actually have a successful career in such a challenging field as entertainment, I respect that. Um, but that doesn't mean that, I mean, certainly means they have perseverance, they have skills, they have, there's certain admirable attributes, but that doesn't mean that I would trust them with my puppy for the weekend,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
Um, I think that um, I think it raises another question and something I wondered about. There are people who I think are nice people.
Sure.
They treat other people nicely. They're kind, they're generous,
Oh, stop, stop.
but no, you don't want me to be referring to you with this
Oh,
because the
okay.
next step is, but
But
I don't respect their intellect. I don't respect their choices. I don't respect their thinking. I don't respect their judgment. I respect their character, but not their judgment. So if we're talking
sure.
about, um, mind and heart and spirit, I respect their heart, maybe their spirit, but not their mind. There are
Hmm.
people whose mind I respect, but not their heart or their
Right.
spirit. Uh, so um, I remember I've mentioned this before, an old TV series um, called Meeting of Minds,
Mm. Yeah.
created and moderated by Steve Allen, the actor,
Origin.
musician, raconteur.
Wasn't he not? Was he not the original Tonight Show host?
He was, I if yeah, I think he was before Jack Parr even.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
The original.
and so he would have four actors portraying characters from history, different time periods, and they would interact with each other. And he
Yeah.
would ask questions. They'd interact with each other. It was fascinating.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and purposely diverse
yes,
philosophies.
very well written, very well acted. So, for example, one episode, and I may be getting the characters wrong, but I do remember it was Thomas Paine, who was author of the Federalist Papers, many of
One
them,
of, yeah.
one of the authors. Um, the Thomas Aquinas, Saint Thomas Aquinas, um, Genghis Khan, and Marie Antoinette, I think were the other two, but I could be wrong about that. But I remember thinking, well, Aquinas is such a kind, wonderful person, and I disagree with him about almost everything he says. And
Uh,
Thomas Paine, I agree with about almost everything, but he's an asshole.
it's amazing how you can agree so much with an entirely disagreeable person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, I agree with his thinking, but uh, there are people who I can agree with who I wouldn't want to spend any time with. And
Sure.
there are people who I wouldn't agree with who I trust with my puppy, you know. Um, so does it require respect to be friends with somebody? And it's I think for me, if it's a question of who they are as a person, that's easy. That's a no, I don't respect. They're not kind to people. They're not nice. I no, I can deal with them on a intellectual basis, but we can't be friends. If it's somebody who's nice, who's kind, who's generous, but I don't respect their intellect. I don't respect their judgment. Their judgment about serious things is flawed.
Hmm.
That's tough for me, you know. It's tough for me, and it's become a real question I'm wrestling with in the political climate. Because there are
Yes.
people who are interpersonally they're kind, but they support some of the most unkind, even cruel things,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and maybe just don't think about it very deeply.
Well, and that's the kind of that. See, there are people that I like and respect,
Hmm.
uh, probably a dozen. There are people that I like, but don't have any particular respect for. And there are lots of people that I respect, but do not like.
Yeah.
So, but I can, have the two beers with a person I like, but don't respect particularly. And to your example of someone who seems kind and you know has some amount of empathy, but as you say, supports things that are completely foreign to my philosophy.
Hmm.
I I tend to give that person who seemed, and not just nice to me, but when I see them in interaction with other people, they seem nice and reasonably
Yeah.
respectful and all
Yeah.
that.
How
Okay.
do they treat wait staff,
Right, right.
for
So if they
example?
if
Right.
they seem to be okay on that level, but their larger, I don't know, political or philosophical ideas are not, that I cannot encompass those things, I put it down to they have not looked beyond themselves. They've been fed a philosophy. Sometimes it's a religion. They were indoctrinated at an early age and have not sufficiently explored their universe. That lets me say, well, you're just underprivileged. You're undereducated. You're not bad. You're not mean. You're undereducated. I can excuse that long enough to have two beers with somebody.
Um,
But I'm also willing to question them about it. I'm willing to take them to task and say, "Well, have you considered this? Do you know that this is also true?"
yeah, I've done that with several people, and their inability to accept new ideas
Right, and that's the
is
difference.
yeah,
That's, like I said, they get the benefit of the doubt until I present them with something and they not just claim ignorance of it, but actively reject it.
right,
That's when the respect level drops to the point where I can't, I'm sorry, which is, this isn't any fun for me anymore. I'm leaving.
right.
So,
Yeah.
so I think we move people up and down all the time in this
Yeah, so
world.
there's also a category that Aristotle didn't consider. I don't know why. And that's like Facebook friends, the social media friendship, you know. There are and there's a lot of those are acquaintances. Having a large network of acquaintances can be socially useful.
Hmm.
Um, I found that I networked with a lot of people because there were people I needed to be in contact with to interview, get information from, that sort of thing. Um, but the category of of Facebook friend is is odd because they're like they're people who it's neither two beers nor a puppy.
No, right, because you don't know enough about them
Right.
actually.
So
And I put
why?
them
Yeah.
somewhere in between the third and second tier
yeah, it's well, there's a friendship of utility, perhaps.
Yeah.
If in the case where I was connecting with people through, geez, I even had to use Twitter X, because that was my only way to contact some people. But Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, the
Hmm.
alumni network, the IMDb Pro through representatives, a whole bunch of, I mean, a lot of all that stuff to connect to people, but not friends, but acquaintances. We didn't really talk to, I mean, acquaintances are not even friends
Right.
of utility.
Right.
They haven't even entered into that yet. I mean,
Yeah.
sort of, if there's a shared, like in my case, there was a shared project and they were gracious enough to give me some of their time and answer some questions. Um, share some documents, some old documents, that was great. That was very generous, and I respect that, their
Hmm.
time and their generosity. But um, that I've blocked a lot of people. I'm not just unfriended, but blocked a lot of people in the
I don't
past
I
couple of
don't
years.
block a lot of I don't block I may have blocked I could count them on one hand, all the people I've blocked over the years. But it's part of it's because I have a very strict rule about who I friend.
Yeah.
Um, and it is if someone I get a friend request and I've got about 1,100 Facebook friends,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of them are through the SCA, the medieval organization we belong to. That's how I know them or how people have probably connected with my profile. So my rule is we've got to have at least triple digits of mutual friends.
Oh,
Number one.
okay.
If you're less than 100 mutual friends, I don't even respond.
Okay.
If and the exception to that is if I look at your profile and I recognize you as someone I would actually go up and talk to
Hmm.
without any other solicitation, then I'll accept the friendship. So
Okay.
so that's the rule for friending them. And then if they don't fit that second category of, oh yeah, I recognize you, I would talk to you, they get unfollowed. I accept
Oh,
friendship, unfollow.
okay. Yeah.
So that's that's it. And that separates me from a lot of crap that I don't care about.
Yeah, I've gotten so many bot requests
Oh yeah.
I mean, those are, just ignore those, block them,
Yeah.
and so on. But um, yeah, I think and I don't, I wonder sometimes if I overemphasize the importance of respecting somebody's thinking to be able to respect them as a person. That I wonder about that. Is as somebody who maybe thinks too much or focuses on that a lot. It's important to me, and I think I couldn't have that third level, that highest level of friends of virtue with people whose thinking as well, whose mind and heart and spirit I don't respect. I think it requires all three. So maybe in the first friendship of utility, I can respect their ability. Maybe it's a thinking ability, related ability to do a certain thing, but not anything more than that. And a friend of what was this? A friend of pleasure, the friend for a season. Oh, okay, they're pleasant enough, they're kind
Hmm.
enough, Um, but in that example, if we were out for beers and they were an asshole to the waitstaff, that would,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and I've seen that. I've encountered that behavior with people who were work friends, and we'd go out, and it's like, no, that's unacceptable. Now, if somebody behaves badly in public, I make a point to say something.
Yeah, I will call somebody on that kind of
If you
behavior
don't
too.
call out people on their behavior, they have no incentive to change. Um, but I'll compliment people on
Hmm.
good behavior as well. Say that was nicely done, that was well done. You look, and we've talked about this before. That's a lovely hat. Thank you for brightening my day. And you go on. You're not
Yeah,
trying to
sure.
get anything. And that's just a casual encounter. Um, but yeah, um, I think once you get to that closer friendship, we all make mistakes, and somebody can make a mistake.
Or be
But
in a bad mood or,
yeah,
yeah,
but
thinking about
if
something else.
you take responsibility for that, you apologize. My mother's four steps of a correct apology, which we talked about a lot, and I've posted about a lot. Um, then it's repairable, um, because it's not you. I mean, it's not who you generally are. Um, I I remember once I think it was Facebook account got spoofed. So somebody was sending out text messages, as if they were from me asking money for money.
No.
And I found out about people pointed out to me because it was unlike me. And they pointed it out, and I changed my passwords, and I sent out apology messages.
Right.
And a friend wrote back and said, I knew it wasn't you because you would sooner bite off your fingers than send out a message that badly written. So
Yeah, no, the content of the message wasn't the issue. The grammar was all
grammar,
off.
spelling, punctuation was sentence, the syntax, it was terrible. So
Well, and there's another aspect, like we were talking about before, that I will give somebody the benefit of the doubt who's undereducated, right? You've not been, and a lot of times you've not been taught to think, right? I mean, lots of people are not taught to think about what they're doing, about what they're saying. They have this set of responses that was implanted in them by their parents or by their school or by whatever. And they just don't think.
yeah.
And I can excuse that because I think that falls under education. They haven't been taught. You got to be taught to think
Yes.
well. So, and where I draw the line is, so I can excuse people who don't think up to a point, but I won't excuse somebody who won't think.
Yes. If they,
That's the difference to me.
yeah. Um, I miss the days when we could have rational, fact-based discussions with people who have differences of philosophy, have reached different conclusions, but we're all operating on the same facts,
Yeah,
saying,
right. There's a
here's
shared reality, at
facts
least.
about the economy, facts about education, facts about statistical facts, whatever, and historical facts. And we could have a discussion about that, reach different conclusions, but we could talk about why. People could change, reach different conclusions, amend their conclusions, modify them, so on, based on that kind of discussion. That is far less likely to happen these days.
Yeah.
I had a discussion with somebody, and um, they said, well, I don't trust those sources. Well, here the sources are peer reviewed, they're in multiple places, they're from verified, trustworthy, these you know journalistic
Right.
Professional
Here's a
journalism
clip of the
things.
person saying it.
Yeah. No, no,
Oh, it's all
it's
deep fakes.
no, yeah. Well, what is your source of information? And they'd say, well, I trust this guy on the internet. Why? What's his
Why?
qualification? Well,
What's his
he's
credential?
right. And
Well, it seems clear, the truthiness thing again, right?
right. I remember one discussion, and this was years ago with somebody, and I said, this what I'm saying, here are my peer-reviewed sources from academic journals and scientific papers and all of that. And they said, oh, peer-reviewed stuff is the worst. You absolutely can't trust it. I said, we have no basis for discussion then. If
Right.
that's the standard of proof, if
Right.
you can't trust that. Now, there are a lot of issues with the with journals and publication and publisher parents,
Yes.
and there's a lot of issues with that. But still, I've been a peer reviewer for some articles, and it's like, okay, here's, and I would give my comments. They'd change it, they'd rewrite, they'd fix, they'd modify it, they'd, some,
Yeah.
but
Well, there are some, sounds redundant, but there are some subjective subjects that you're getting. The peer review is sort of forming a consensus about what the truth is, if there isn't an actual fact.
well, yeah, but those even things like perception studies of perception
Right.
are based on experiments, survey data,
Yes.
those sorts of things with a large enough sample size, if it's done correctly, that you can glean
Right.
some facts from that.
And
And that
that's
can,
what I was getting at is that
yeah,
if there's any science to it at all, the methodology becomes the main issue. What
yes, yeah.
how did you arrive at your conclusions? And then and I think what especially in science, a lot of people don't understand how cutthroat the scientific community is, how
Well,
dog eat dog it is about
uh,
getting published and having your ideas put in the forefront of journals and so on.
but
So when
there's also a lot of cooperation in science.
yeah,
When
but
you look at,
my point
yeah,
is only that the peer review is that these are people who are really trying hard to disprove your conclusion if it differs from their own conclusion.
well, yeah, that's not been my experience. But then I've
It's a
been,
different kind, but you're doing a different kind of peer review.
yeah, it's true. I mean, I don't, if it's accurate, if there's something of value in it, that's fine. I don't, I
Sure.
want that out there. I think that's true for a lot of people. I don't think there's anyone, I don't, not say not anyone. I think the likelihood of peer reviewers to intentionally try to sabotage um, someone else's work is
If you're living on grants,
it's yeah, but I think it's less likely than the other thing is that there've been too many papers that had to have been retracted that have been published because later it came out that it couldn't be replicated or their data was falsified in a way that wasn't a peer reviewer won't have necessarily have access to the raw data. They have access to the article and the article is
okay,
supported by the data presented. So, but if somebody tries to replicate it, they get access to the first article's raw data and then it proves to be the numbers don't add up. This does not make sense. And then it's retracted. So I think there's a consciousness of let's make sure that this is at least from what we see is accurate, is a reasonable conclusion from the data that's presented. If it can't be replicated and there's a problem with the data, that will come out later. So I don't think that there's I think the idea of people trying to sabotage work because they're peer reviewing work that's competitive with theirs. I don't think it's blind anyway, the peer review.
No, you're
So
right, but it's not directed at the individual. If it contradicts the theory or that they've been putting forward, they are invested in disproving a
yeah,
contrary
but if
study.
it's and then it still gets published. Now,
Right. Well, sure.
right.
Sure. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. That's if it's gotten through that process where
Yeah.
someone is
Okay.
actively trying to find fault with your research, that's great. If you actually get published after that process, that is reliable data.
Yeah, I was combing through things pretty carefully. I know that there was an article, there was a study published about, and it was a study about um, whether or not readability, I wasn't peer reviewing this one, but I read it, whether or not readability is enhanced by two spaces after a period or not, whether one, and I read this and the biggest problem is that the researchers were not, they had no design background. So
Oh,
they were using monospaced courier, which is
mm,
typewriter, like
okay. Yeah,
typewriter. So of course you needed two spaces after,
yeah,
but nobody uses that anymore unless maybe people who are writing computer code. I don't know if even that's true. Um, so I wrote the journal that published this. I said, this is really flawed because that's not it's no.
yeah,
They
yeah.
weren't even using they weren't even using like Times Roman, like or Times New Roman, like a newspaper, print newspaper, or using something like Verdun or Arial, online
Right.
uh, type. Um, I said this is the conclusions are ridiculous because yeah, it makes sense for what they were testing, but what they were testing was crap.
Yeah,
So I
right.
never got
These
a re
conclusions might have held up in the 50s.
yeah, I never got a response from the journal, but it was I was not the only one to write from a design perspective that this was ridiculous. Um, so so anyway, kind of gotten far field here, um, which is shocking because that hardly ever happens.
Hardly,
Um,
hardly ever.
um, so I think that I'm still going to be wrestling with the idea of um, people. There's some people who are, I'd say, they're all heart and no brains, you know,
Yeah,
and um, and I've mentioned them. I've been passing before the bandwagon effect, the joiners, the FOMO, you know,
yeah,
I'm going to support this thing, protest this thing, agree with this thing, disagree with this thing, because everybody else is, and I don't know how to think for myself,
yeah.
and I
There's
accept new
certainly the outrage.
information, and yeah.
There's certainly the outrage of the week.
Yes, and this is across the political spectrum too.
Yeah,
As we have both mentioned before, um, people make assumptions about our, well, I'll speak for myself, for my of where I stand on a number of issues, and they're often incorrect because I'm not I'm not in that sense a joiner. I won't
right.
join in bec and this is part of the the I'm not even sure you'd call it friendship, but maybe it's friendship of utility. A political party or political entity or group, you have a lot of people who disagree with each other, but they all are joined together in this utility to accomplish what they want, but it can be different from the people who are right next to them, but they all think that it's going to accomplish what they want. Um, and I find that uh, I find that problematic sometimes because yeah, I somebody was saying, gee, they wish they had a choice of voting for somebody instead of voting against somebody. Say, I voted in every presidential and midterm election since I was first able to vote,
Hmm.
and I have always voted against somebody. There have been a couple of occasions, I think, in those many years when I voted for somebody, but it was not thinking that this person was perfect. It was thinking that they were better than the other choice.
Well,
So, and
well,
to
yeah,
that
of
sense,
course.
it was against the other person as much as it was for them, I think.
Well, you're always weighing the positives and negatives, right? I mean, that's only rational.
Yeah.
If I vote this way, I'm not going to get everything I want, right? I'm going to have to give up these things to vote for this person, but if I vote for this person, I might get this other thing, but this is a terrible idea.
Yeah,
That's
it's a chess move,
yeah,
it's playing chess, not falling in love. So,
right. Yeah. And I don't think I didn't vote while I was in college because well, I mean, I only came of age while I was in college, but um, just getting registered and all that stuff was just more than I wanted to deal with while I was in school. Um,
I did first election I voted in. I was I was in college.
they might have made it easier on your campus to register.
It was easy, pretty easy, and I was able to vote where I went to school,
Yeah,
and
I didn't have any of that. I would have had to go through the Secretary of State's office and all that.
yeah,
But that being said, when I look back, even even when I was old enough, before I was old enough to vote, but still just starting to recognize what politics meant to me as an individual, your late teens, um, there was a sense that, at least I found a sense that both parties were overlapped a great deal because back in days of yore, I'm using that term now instead of back in the day or back in olden times. In days of
days of
yore,
yore.
um, everybody was trying to get the a great majority of votes. They were trying to. You were aiming for 75%. You were aiming for a mandate. You were aiming for
Mm,
a clear majority, right? To carry your district or the state or whatever. You wanted the most people in your district as possible to vote for you. You want, and in fact, it's actually not that. It's the mirror of that. You wanted to be seen as representing the most people in your district
yeah, yeah,
or the country or the your state or whatever. So so the Venn diagram of policies was there was a lot of overlap back then. And so when you voted, I mean, oh, now the other side won this time. So that one thing that nobody on my side really liked is might happen or might not, depending on how legislatures work at that moment. But there was
there were moderate Democrats and liberal Republicans,
right,
conservative Democrats and moderate Republicans. There, I mean, yeah,
and the general sense was that everybody is trying to do, or at least people believe that everybody is trying to do the most good for the most people. How
mm,
that's accomplished is the difference
right,
in what we're voting for. How best how best to do that to give the most benefit to the largest section of the population. And so if it didn't go your way, well, okay. I still think they're working in the general sense of bettering society. I don't agree with how they're going about it, but they're not the enemy. We have a some disagreement in philosophy, And if their way doesn't work out in the next 4 years or 6 years or whatever it is, we'll correct. That is no longer the case.
No, no,
It doesn't work like that anymore.
no. Well, and there were a couple of things when the Republicans decided under one speaker they would only bring a bill to the floor if it had complete support from their party and they could pass it with only their party. And
Yeah.
so they bipartisanship went out the window. And
Well, and
um,
changing the filibuster rules and a lot of that.
well, which, yeah, but hasn't completely gone away. So that there was everything in the Senate requires a 60 vote supermajority. And yeah, it's everything has been an attempt to gain more power and to gain permanent power. And that um there were people in elected office in Congress who were not only considered themselves friends of utility, even in different parties, but friends of pleasure, and even some who considered them others close friends.
Yeah.
I think that that is so unlikely now, um, and particularly with people, the demonization of people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I think um, thinking of acquaintances I know who they're good people, but they they are getting their facts, their alternative facts, their information from a narrow source, and and that I understand that given the media changes in media and changes in news and social media. But what's really troubling is when they are not open to considering other sources of information
Right.
and other ideas. They will dismiss it. And we've talked about that before in cognitive dissonance and selective and motivated reasoning and all of that, that they filtered out. And I find it somebody at that point, I may respect them as a good person, but I cannot trust them to
Yeah.
be honest. I can't trust their judgment, and I wouldn't trust them to behave in ethical ways
Hmm.
because their judgment is so flawed. And that's
Well, and it's not even to me. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's not even so much their judgment. It's that they are clearly willing to excuse
yeah,
bad behavior if it profits them.
yes.
That's not just
Aren't
judgment.
aren't
That's
aren't you? And I'm had this conversation. Yeah, well, I know he was accused of doing, no, he's convicted. I know he was accused of these things, but I was better off. How were you better off? Well, you know, and I was
I could
better
say
off.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. So yeah, you still can't, but um, so I think when it comes down to it, I'm going to respect few people for what they can do, trust them for what I know I can expect from them, and hold my friends of virtue and character close.
Well, and yes, and those people who I consider friends of virtue, friends of character, I'm going to do what I can to help them maintain that level and and um, ask them to help me as well.
Yeah,
So I
cool.
consider this, I consider our weekly sessions here to be part of that, keeping my mind active and considering possibilities and different philosophies. You and I tend to agree most of the time.
Most of the time, there are things that we do disagree about, but
Right.
yeah, a
And
lot of
often it's one or the other of us hasn't heard
yeah,
a,
yeah,
the particular argument.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So, yes. So thank you for having these conversations with me. I, uh, I think they're important to me,
mhm.
anyway, and who gives a shit about anybody else? So,
No, we like you. We
yeah,
really
yeah,
like
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, whatever, whatever. Yeah,
We,
yeah.
and if you don't respect us for our philosophies or whatever, that's okay. But you ought to take a moment to consider a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
You can reject it if you've got sufficient facts. That's fine. We're not geniuses. Well, I'm not a genius. He's not going to disavow that. You watch. But so like us or don't like us, but you
Yeah,
can hit like even if you don't like us,
yeah, yeah.
and you can share and subscribe and do all those things. We'd really appreciate it. Send us your ideas. Send us corrections of the things we've said or proposed. Um,
Cocktail recipes. What are your
ooh,
favorite cocktails? Yeah.
it's a great idea.
Yeah, we could do, and I mean, we did do an episode on how to order a drink, but we could do an episode on cocktails. That would require a whole setup here of making and
Yeah,
mixing. So,
that might be hard to coordinate.
yeah,
We might have to do that. We might have to do that together live or something
yeah,
where we're in
yeah,
the
we
same
could do
place at the
that.
same
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
But we should do that again. We should be in the same place at the same time more often.
yeah, yeah. That would be
So,
good.
so
Okay, so thank you, everybody. And until we see you next time, be thou
a good night.
and true.